Okay, when I teach High Story to you, I like to connect it to your life, no matter what we're learning. So today we're gonna play Connect the Dots. We're gonna start with you. So you are living today, and not that long ago, you were spending trillions of dollars on a war in Iraq and Afghanistan. All right, so I made this list when we were doing that in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, and it said war in Iraq, Afghanistan. At the height of that war, we were spending $410 million a day on that war. And per hour, we were spending $17 million a day. And just to give you an idea of how much that is, for a year at that time to run King Middle School, it cost about $9 million. So just for half an hour of our tax dollars, which the government was collecting, which is your money and everybody who's paying into it, it's being spent on these things. It could be spent on other things. I don't say that to say that we shouldn't have wars. I say that for you to understand that there's always trade-offs on whatever it is that we're spending money on. So you just think about the school. If you wanted to have, way smaller class size, you wanted everybody to have a computer to take home, you want all these things, we can spend money on that if we don't spend it in other places. So that connects to you to trillions of dollars. And you might be thinking, okay, well, what does that have to do with World War II? Well, what it has to do with World War II is during World War II, you had the Axis powers and the Allied powers facing off. And the Axis powers generally was Germany and Italy and Japan. And then the Allied powers were generally led by England and the United States and France. So after the war, the Allied powers won, and there had been the Holocaust during the war. And so, statistics say over 6 million people of Jewish descent and other things that were targeted were killed. And so what happened is in the aftermath of that, the Allied powers sort of decided how to sort of run a lot of the world after that, like where the borders were going to be and what the countries were going to be, especially in Africa and other parts of the world. And one place that they created at that time had historically been a nation for Jewish people called Israel as part of the religion. But the modern form of the country was really formed after World War II. And they put it right here in the Middle East. When they created Israel, which has the really important city of Jerusalem in it, there were people who were living there already, and they identified as Palestinians. And so when that country was formed, it led to a lot of tension. There was actually a war that occurred in establishing the borders, and then there were some areas, the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, were established where many Palestinians lived. So it was really just a lot going on there. And you can imagine that the other countries around there might have had some opinions about what should have happened, and this led to tension as well. So that was World War II. Then you might be like, okay, how does that connect to the Pilgrims and how does that connect to me? So the Pilgrims came from England to the United States, and they established a colony here, and that led to the United States. And that is why we speak English, and that is why every president pretty much has identified as a Christian, because the Pilgrims were coming with their religion, and it was very important to them. And so that really shapes your culture. You have to understand where your culture comes from and the influence of that in order to understand your own life. That goes all the way back to the Crusades, which was a time when Europe, which was Christian, was sending people all across Europe down to Jerusalem to try to take over Jerusalem because people were Muslim there, and they felt like it was something where they wanted Jerusalem to be controlled and have access for Christian pilgrims and so on. Pilgrims meaning people who were journeying there on pilgrimages, different from the pilgrims coming to America. So that was the Crusades, and that was a series of multiple wars where Europeans went to Jerusalem. And that's connected back to Muhammad around 500 CE, where he started a religion called Islam, which actually built on top of Christianity. So it's related to Christianity, which was built on top of Judaism. But that led to sort of these religions that are sometimes in conflict and sometimes in connection around this area in the Middle East. So I'm trying to show you why the Middle East matters to you. We're connecting the dots. And that goes over to the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire was started here in Italy, and it spread throughout Europe and around the Mediterranean Sea. And there was a guy named Emperor Constantine, who I'll tell you the story when we study Rome, converted to Christianity. And so a lot of Europe became Christian, and that is what has led to these other things. When the Pilgrims came, they identified as Christian. When the Crusades happened, they were coming from Europe and they identified as Christian. That all started with the Roman Empire and when that emperor made that decision. And finally, we go all the way back to Abraham. Abraham is often considered the father of Judaism, and that religion though a small in numbers religion worldwide, is a very influential religion because of its connection to the Middle East and Abraham starting it. We'll be talking about the Kaaba and how Abraham is said to have built the Kaaba. And then Christianity builds on top of Judaism. You may have heard of Jesus being called Jewish before. And then Islam builds on top of Christianity. So understanding all that helps you to understand all the way up to you and how these things affect your world. So we're going to go ahead and talk about some fascinating facts about the Middle East because this is the area we're studying. The first thing I want you to know is that Mesopotamia was there. Maybe you studied Mesopotamia last year. It is part of the 6th grade curriculum. You might have studied about Sumeria. And what we learned about that time is that we went from Paleolithic in that area, which is where you hunt and gather, to Neolithic, where you do farming. And that farming allows you to have more time and energy to create art and cities because you're not constantly looking for food. So we're going to go ahead and write here that Mesopotamia there, and that is the birthplace, what we're going to call Western civilization. All right, so that's the birthplace of Western civilization. And that actually spread and ended up influencing Europe and all the way around, eventually to America. And the reason that that is so influential is because we are considered, like in the United States, the descendants of Western civilization, okay, which started all the way back in Mesopotamia. And we're going to go ahead and mention that farming was the key to that, okay? All right, next up, we're going to talk about how there were 3 world religions that started there. So we already talked about Judaism, which is the first world religion that's monotheistic that started there. Most people say that less than 0.2% of the world is Jewish and identifies with Judaism as religion. And then we had Christianity building on top of that. And most statistics say that greater than 30% of the world is Christian. And the last one is Islam. And it is widely considered that more than 20% of the world follows Islam. So you can see over half of the world is following religions that started in the Middle East, all starting back with Judaism and then building on top. Also the Middle East was a gateway. It was a gateway between 3 major continents. If you look over here, you'll see the Middle East is here, right? And then it's between these 3 continents. So it is a gateway between Asia, Europe, and Africa. And so a lot of trade and knowledge and information flows through here. So we're going to go ahead and make a note of that we get a lot of trade and travel, and therefore knowledge, because people, when they travel, are always bringing knowledge to other places, going through that. There's a long history of trade, travel, and knowledge through the Middle East. And finally, the last thing you really should know as a fascinating fact about the Middle East is that the economy is very influential worldwide. And that is because 53% of the world's, a very important economic thing, world's oil reserves are in the Middle East. And that ends up impacting our foreign policy and all the money that we spend in different things that we do. So hopefully you see how this all connects to you. Thanks.